I'm excited to talk about change management with you guys. Of course, these days we call it organizational change management. Anybody know why? Because we're consultants and it sounds fancier and it sells better. This is like a big theme in the marketplace. 10 years ago it was a big theme, and then it went away and everybody said, oh, that's the fuzzy stuff and I don't care. And now it's come back as a big deal, and people buy projects that are change management or buy consultants based on their change management abilities. So I think here sometimes we say change management and sometimes we say organizational change management, but it means the same thing. So what we do for a living is we help people think and act differently so that they're more successful. Sounds simple, right? Do people want to think and act differently?
Not usually.
I don't. Nobody does. Clients are not going to pay $300 an hour blended rate for pretty PowerPoint. They could do it themselves. They could hire a design artist for $25 an hour. What they pay for is this. Now you have deliverables and PowerPoint and all that, took me a long time to realize this. When I was doing y'all's job, I thought what I was making was deliverables because I was trying to please that partner that probably wanted to fire me, and I wasn't very good at deliverables. It takes about 2 or 3 years to learn. But deliverables are the mean, not the end. If you could do it with interstellar mental telepathy, you would, but you can't get people on the same page without a page. And I'll get on my soapbox on deliverables just a second and then get off and get on my change management soapbox. But when it comes to deliverables, what I would urge you to think about is the outcome-based objective. The thing that you're doing, how will it cause people to think and act differently? That's what governs your slide deck. What I used to do was just start doing slides. Now what I do is sometimes I'll spend 45 minutes thinking about, when this meeting is over, what do I want people to have decided or done or think differently about? So change management, there's a bunch of tools and templates and all that kind of stuff on SID. Do y'all know what SID is yet? During my time at Scott Madden, we've had a dozen knowledge management systems, of which all but 2 have been abysmal failures. SID is one of the 2. SID is probably, at this point, a moderate success. It's a little clunky, but it's way the hell better than the other 10. So on SID, you would find a method for change management. It would have tools and templates. It would have sponsors and agents and targets. It would have 148 pages. And if you need that stuff, I would go there. I ain't talking about that today. I'm going to talk about first principles. How does change work? What do people go through when they experience change? Why do those things happen to them? And what do they need from you and leaders to get through the change? So let me define, say OCM? Let me define OCM. Our definition is it's a practical and disciplined approach to increase the willingness, confidence, and ability of the organization to make the required change. Pretty straightforward. I want to call your attention to 3 things. The first one is willingness, ability, and confidence. So any psych majors in here? Anyone know expectancy theory? So it's usually not in 101, but expectancy theory is about behaviors, and it says the probability that I will perform a new behavior is a function of 3 things. It's a function of my willingness. Do I believe that I'll be better off performing the behavior? Is the risk-reward architecture for that behavior better than what I'm doing now? It's a function of my ability. Can I actually do it? You know, you might offer me $1 million to solve a differential equation right now, and I'd like the $1 million, but my calculus is a little rusty. I couldn't do it. And then the third thing is confidence. For most of us, our ability outstrips our confidence. So it might be I want to do it and I can do it, but I don't yet believe in myself. And so what expectancy theory says, if I want to increase the probability you perform that behavior, I've got to dial up all three: willingness, ability, and confidence. The second thing is the required change. The change has to be specified behaviorally. I've got to say what I want people to do, start doing, stop doing, or do differently. If I say, you know, I want to change the culture, would that qualify?
In my opinion, it's a little general.
No, it's not specified. So there are consultants who come in to do that, and they may be doing black magic or voodoo. In your book, they're not doing change management. The third thing, and it takes some doing to specify, you know, you could define a culture as norms and beliefs. You could define what those behavioral norms and those beliefs are. You then could go at that. But unless we did those things, we wouldn't meet Ryan's test, we wouldn't meet mine. The third thing is implicit in here, which is an understanding of the target audience. What you want people to do differently, and specifically, is usually different by project, by business unit, by department, by level. People aren't all the same. We need different stuff. If I'm doing big scale change management, the first thing I ask for is a table, and the rows are the segments. And then the first column is how many people are in each. And then the next column is what are they doing now. And then the next column is what do we want them to do. And then the next column is how are we going to get them there. That's a threshold question. So this is the 3 stages of change management. This is something that I made up. You won't see anyone else using this. There are a bunch of other ones like this. A lot of our clients use ADKAR, the Pro-C stuff. Has anyone seen ADKAR? No? It's awareness, desire, knowledge, action, and results or reinforcement. So we use that when clients like it. Doesn't matter. Having these 3 stages helps me. People almost always, when they talk about change management, they at least mean the vision stuff. I'm going to communicate. I'm going to have a vision. I'm going to inspire you. Often they mean the development. I'm going to train you. I'm going to help you improve your ability. Seldom do they mean accountability. In my view, if you're not holding people accountable, you may be doing black magic or voodoo, but you're not doing change management. What speaks louder, what we say or what we do? I'm sorry, Rob? He said what we do. So if we say this is important, but then you don't change the risk-reward architecture, what people learn is, okay, here's the new deal. We say this stuff, and then we go about our business doing what we were always doing before. I'll talk more about that in a second. So I want to talk a little bit about training. Typically, you see computer-based training, CBT. You see platform training, that's what I'm doing right now. And you see behavioral training, which is case studies or exercises or simulations or on-the-job training. The research suggests that if I'm trying to change your behavior, this is by far the most effective. If I can get you to rehearse the new behavior under as close to live fire conditions as possible, it's much more likely you'll do it when the bullets are flying. But most training that you see is computer-based training and platform training. Why is that, would you guess?
Easier.
It's easier. And what department decides what training will be delivered? I'll give you a hint. It begins with a T, Elizabeth. Training department.
The training department.
Elizabeth said the training department. So if you're in the training department, you do platform training, you do computer-based training. Behavioral training is extraordinarily hard to design. You got to get a bunch of line managers involved. It's difficult, and so we do this because it's easy and cheap. And for change management purposes, the only problem is, it don't work. A couple more things to say about this page. cascading. If you ask managers, what's the most important thing to employee satisfaction, they'll say money. If you ask employees, money is not number one or number two, it's number five. Now that assumes no hygiene issues, that you're paid at market and comp is fair and all that. Number one is interesting work. Number two is being in the know. You think about a time when you sat down with your boss and, and she said, so tomorrow there's this whole reorg that's coming about and here's what we're gonna do. And suddenly you're in the cool kids and you're in the know. Everybody loves that. So everything you do, training, communication has to cascade down the organization, putting each level in the know before the next one, because then you can harness that energy for change management. And by level, I don't just mean the hierarchical level. You want to find the opinion leaders who may be a frontline supervisor. What the research shows is when we stand up the big dogs to talk to in their town hall meeting and say, here's the new stuff we're going to do, you have to do that, but it's not influential. What's influential is if Michael is the person that I respect. After I listen to the big dog at the water cooler, I go, Michael, what's the deal here? What he says next governs what I'm going to think. If he says, this is a bunch of BS, I never heard of it before, I think this is crap, we're done. If he says, actually, I heard a little bit about it, and I think there's something to this, that's very powerful. So you need to cascade down the organization. So that means that you have to orchestrate your client leaders. I had a CEO edit my change management deck, which really irritated the hell out of me, and because I've been doing it for about 10 or 15 years. And she resequenced the slides, which I'm annoyed to admit it's much better than the way I was doing it, and so you're seeing her sequence. The other thing that she did was she edited some of the words. And this was a project with John Kerner. I don't think he's on the list for this. Yeah. One of our partners. And John and I went through it and we couldn't figure out what she had changed. And so we asked our handler and he said, well, you had gender bias in your slides. I said, what? So she had taken out the words contact sport. And I said, has she never seen field hockey? So I've used her sequence of slides, but I politely disagree that the word contact support is evidence of gender bias. And so if I've triggered anything, I'll be sued later by all of you. So it is a contact sport. That means that making decks and standing up and having big presentations and all that is one thing. What's more important is the guerrilla war you and the leaders fight. You've got to have touch points with people. So far, so good. So I'm not going to cover much of this. What I am going to cover is reward those that make it and hold those accountable that don't. In any big scale change project, you've got to find a few heroes and make sure good things happen to them. And you've got to find a few goats and string them up. So on a project we did in 2011 that we're doing a do-over on now, an assessment and an improvement. There was a guy, he actually used to work here, named Subha Nishtala, who was like a minor functionary in supply chain, and we asked him to be our core team lead. And in the course of a year, he went from minor functionary in supply chain to on everybody's succession plan. When he finished, the officers applauded him, which had never happened before in the history of the world, and he's now a very successful director. The SVP at the time, I guess I can say this woman called Lori Sundberg, the HR SVP, was a problem child and fought the change, fought the new direction of the guy that's now COO, and a year later she was fired. It's not my idea of a good time to see bad things happen to people, but almost always in a big change effort, you're going to have those behaviors. And unless there are consequences, good and bad, for the behaviors, it's back to what do we say versus what do we do? And what you teach people is, so what we do now is when we're in public, we say all this stuff is good, and then when we're in private, we say this is a bunch of BS. So you want to architect your project so that your clients are held accountable for their behaviors, good and bad. Now, you hope they're all good, but so far I've not had one of those. So, two kinds of change management. Explicit is the sponsor agent target, it's the templates, it's the 148-page deck. Embedded is what Scott Madden is good at. We are, there's a Chris Crane quote that says that their firm has this isn't going to be exactly right, but has a keen ability to implement new processes in a way that the clients own them after we leave. And we do that by designing projects so that people change organically as they go through the process. For example, how do you get power in an organization? I come in as a consultant, and how many people in that organization would report to me, would you think?
Report to you?
Yeah.
None.
Yeah, it's the same answer as the fuel cost, 0. So why would anyone listen to me? Because y'all said before that people don't want to think and act differently. Lord knows I don't. The way that you get power in an organization is you borrow it. There is an existing power structure, which is usually different than the table of organization. You create accountability events where people have to show up in front of the steering committee and report on what they're doing. And then you orchestrate those events to make sure that the right things happen. So if one of your clients is doing well, you might go to the big dog beforehand and say, Sally is being particularly effective, and it'd be really helpful if you'd say, boy, this is good work. Say you've got another client who's a problem child, Susie, and Susie won't listen to you and won't do what she's supposed to do and isn't doing it right. You might say to the big dog, if I were you, when Susie presents, I'd have a few questions, and these might be the questions. And so about the 4th or 5th time that you said to Susie, you really need a project plan here. And the big dog says, where the hell's your project plan? Usually folks go, wait a minute, maybe if I listened to those guys, I'd have better meetings. So you design the project, we'll talk more about how you do it, but one way that you do it is you create accountability events that borrow the power structure of the organization. You create a world where people can hold themselves accountable for what you want them to do, and where their superiors can help them do that if they're not inclined to do it. So I'm going to talk about 3 things in kind of first principles land for change management. I'm going to talk about the 4 Ps, I'm going to talk about the stages of change, and then I'm going to talk about SCARF. So the research suggests that for people to change, you have to give them 4 Ps. A picture of the future state, an ennobling purpose, a part to play, and a plan. So the picture of the future state is sometimes what we call vision or mission. It is an uplifting picture. You look at that world and you say, this is better. It's the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. He said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a world where they will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. You hear that and you go, boy, that is better than the way things are. Give me that. So you have to call forth my aspirational self. You've got to call me to something that's bigger and more important than me. So total shareholder return is not an inspirational measure. It can be community. It can be customers. It can be employees. It can be their values. If you're me and you work at Scott Madden, it can be anything. One thing you want to find out when you go into an organization is, what is it that tugs at people's heartstrings? What do they believe and what do they need? Back to that embedded change management, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but great project design is the Venn diagram between what people need and what they believe in and what your project needs. If you can define that union space between those 2 things, they will pull your wagon. So ennobling purpose has to be aspirational, and has to be aspirational for those people, which may be different than what's aspirational for you. Part to play is I have to give you a line of sight. I've got to say, Ryan, we can't do this without you. This is your role. That's the ennobling purpose. That's the picture of where we're headed, and there's line of sight. If you do this, it will help us get there. You've got to see yourself in it. And then the last thing is plan. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So how many Ps do we need to get people to change? Yellow says 4. Where'd you get that from? And you believe me? So if you have more of an intuitive thinking style, then you need the first three. You need the picture, the ennobling purpose, and the part to play. When you get to the plan, you kind of go, you're wrecking it with all these stupid details. Do we really have to have all this junk? If you're a more deductive thinker, the picture sounds nice, it's good poetry, but you go, it ain't specific. I don't see what we're talking about here. But when we get to the plan, you go, finally something tangible and concrete and real, now I get it. Your typical audience is going to be 50-50, so it's actually right. You need 4 for the audience, but for any individual, for most of them, they actually only need 3. The way that I use this is when I'm writing communication. So I often write stuff for other people to say, talking points or whatever, and it's change. Then when I think I'm done, I get this out and I go, can I find all these things? Or sometimes we facilitate client workshops. We train them on this and say, all right, now write something that has this stuff in it. I have a client that I would write talking points for. We were doing a large change effort. And he'd come into his group as all the plant managers. And he'd say, Stuart wrote these talking points for me. I am going to completely ignore them. Mm-hmm. And then he'd say stuff. And their inside joke was he actually used about half of them, but we never told anyone. So that's the 4 Ps. So next, the stages of change. So a little bit of a preface. This is based on the Kubler-Ross of death and dying. Has anyone read it?
I was just about to say, this is almost exactly like her model, yeah.
So, but I've dumbed it down to 4. It's a little different. It doesn't have, bargaining angers, maybe like resistance a little bit. So what I want to tell you is, so Kubler-Ross went around and interviewed people that were dying, terminally ill patients. So, and she came up with this model. If you ever deal with anyone in real life who is going through real grief like that, do not use this. Don't use any model. Everybody's different. They don't follow a process. They don't fit into a cookie color model. What they need from you is different than what the model says and different over time. And so my personal advice would be try to figure out what they need. And if they need to talk about it, talk about it. If they need to not talk about it, not talk about it, whatever it is. However, for garden variety change, we're reorganizing, we're changing the process, we're laying people off. Most people go through these changes, and there's Kubler-Ross and a significant body of research that says when they do, there are things that they need, and if you give them those things, they will move on to the next stage. So this is the cookbook. So the first stage of change is denial. Has anybody heard the phrase burning platform for change? If you've heard that, raise your hand.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Burning platform for change. You guys haven't heard that? Jennifer and James have. So a lot of, it's like a buzzword, it's business speak. And so you'll hear folks say we've got to create the burning platform for change. So the origin of that phrase is actually an oil platform in the North Sea. And in the North Sea, the water in the winter is about 43 degrees Fahrenheit. According to Scientific American, if you're in water that's 43 degrees Fahrenheit, in 10 to 20 minutes, what will happen is you're at risk of hypothermia, of course. And so what your body will do is suck all the blood to the core, out of the extremities to try and keep you warm, at which point you lose all strength and muscular coordination, and you then drown. So the question is, why would someone jump the 100 feet into the North Sea when they've had safety training and they know they'll be dead in 10 to 20 minutes? What would be the burning platform for change?
You're on fire.
Say again?
You're on fire?
When the platform is on fire. People do not change because it's intellectually stimulating to do so. They do not change because cool consultants have drawn circles and arrows on a flip chart or in PowerPoint that says, look at this is great. They change because they notice the urgent need for change, particularly one that leaves them little choice, like the platform's on fire. I may be dead in 10 or 20 minutes and I'm scared of heights, but if the platform's on fire and it's getting warm, I'm going to give it a shot. In our world, it probably violates safety rules to set anything on fire at the clients. So if you do that, I'm going to say Jennifer suggested. However, if you can change the risk-reward architecture, if you can get an aligned senior leadership team all saying the same thing, and have those good and bad consequences showing up for the right behaviors, think about it, it's your career. You're going to see that as a burning platform for change. So the second step is resistance. So if you don't remember anything else about this, I'm going to tell you some things about resistance that I just think are a magic trick. First, I'm going to tell you what it comes from. So resistance is when people are saying, we tried that a couple years ago, it doesn't work. You don't understand, we don't have the resources to do this. Jennifer made me do it, whatever it is. So the source of resistance is real or perceived loss of control. I may like your picture of future state. I may agree with you that current state stinks and is terrible, but it's my current state and I know how to function in it. And so when you tell me stuff is going to change, I'm scared. Uncertainty makes this worse. Resistance is normal. We all go through it. You go through it for positive change as well as negative change. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I've gotten a new job or a promotion to partner comes to mind where I go, holy crap, I can't do this. And for me, that was actually true for my first 2 years as a partner. But anyway, eventually I got the hang of it. So this quote helps me. It isn't the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. I tend to be afraid of transitions. I can get through the change. It's on the front end that I have difficulty. So what makes people resist is the gap opening up between expectations and reality. So you're the consultant, you've mapped out the process. What can you do about that gap? Tom?
Make it less scary for them, plan it out so they know milestones, that sort of thing, so they feel a little bit more comfortable with the change.
That's exactly right. I think we all ought to forgive Tom for stealing Evan's renewable energy. You know what's going to happen. So you can narrow the gap between expectations and realities by telling them, here are the milestones, here's what's going to happen. And you can narrow that. If it's a big change, you may not be able to close it 100%, but you can make it smaller. So if you still have a gap and you still get resistance, and this is the magic trick, what people need is they need you to acknowledge their feelings. Remember, the resistance is, I'm scared. I'm scared because I'm losing control. I'm one of the strong needs for control, and so it scares the hell out of me. I'm scared because it's uncertain. Those feelings have to go somewhere, and so where they're going is I'm going to push back on Greg as much as I can in the hopes of making this go away. If you acknowledge my feelings and say, I hear that you have a concern that we've tried this in the past and it didn't work, and tell me more about that. That grounds those feelings, and that helps me move on. It's like there's this little 2-year-old inside of me that's frightened, needs his parents to acknowledge that things are scary. And if you give me that, you'll let me move on. I would encourage you to try this, and try it with your significant other or your spouse. When you say, I want to go out for Thai food, and she says, but I hate Thai food. Try acknowledging their feelings. The people who are overtrained in this, who have communications, training, and are taught to echo everything that's said. So when you say, I want to go out for lunch to Mexican food, they say, I hear you're saying you want to go out to lunch for Mexican food. And I say, yes, I hear you saying yes. So don't do that. Don't be a robot. Do it in your own way with your own voice and your own personality. You don't have to approve of my concerns. You just have to show me that you've heard them. So the third stage is exploration. As soon as you see exploration behavior. There are two big families of behavior in life, as we'll talk about in a second. One is approach behavior, and the other is avoidance behavior. So resistance is I'm backing up and I'm pushing you away. As soon as you see me ask a clarifying question, well, that third milestone, tell me a little bit more about that. Or, you know, how would this work in the month of March? What would we actually do? As soon as you see approach behavior, you want to help me reframe. Most innovation and progress is seeing old things with new eyes. This thing here is prototyped in February of 2005 as one of the first prototypes in Johnny Ivy's lab. It comes out June 27th, 2007. But when it's prototyped, there's not one new thing in the prototype. There's a keyboard, some speakers, a touch screen that they bought, an old-timey telephone, a few other things. There's an iPod. There's nothing in this box that's anything new. It all been sitting around for a while. No, none of the technologies was even invented in the last year. But, you know, they've sold almost 1 billion of these now. And so what Steve Jobs was able to do was get people to see that collection of stuff and say, this collection of stuff could be something different. It could be this. As soon as you see approach behavior, you want to give them a new frame. As we'll talk about in a second, their brains are context engines. Give them a context to put their understanding within. The last stage is commitment. So as soon as you see behavior, does anyone here have small children, like 10 months old, 12 months old?
2 years.
2 years. So when you're, do your children walk?
Mm-hmm.
So when
They don't walk.
when your child started walking, did you say, you idiot, you're walking like you're drunk. What's wrong with you?
I did laugh and take pictures of them, but
Almost no one does. If they are vertical and their feet are moving, you say, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, as you dive for the coffee table and try and get the priceless antiques off. Something's going to get busted. We learn by successive approximation, whether we're learning to walk or learning a new process or whatever. Reward whatever behavior you see and help shape that behavior. And so just like you did with your, how old when they started to walk?
they were all so early. So 15, 17 months.
15, 17 months. You provide praise and recognition. You're walking, you're making progress, you're doing so great. So 4 stages of change. The way that you use this is you diagnose the client and try and figure out where they are. And if they're going, I don't need any of this stuff, you give them a burning platform for change. If they understand why you think it's needed, but they're pushing back, you narrow the gap between expectations and reality, and you acknowledge feelings. If they're starting to explore the space, you give them a context and frame. And if they're starting to perform new behaviors, you point to the stuff you like and you say, that's wonderful. So one last one. When am I supposed to end? 3:30? We're good. Maybe we'll finish early. So this in the slide deck is sort of some of what I just said about resistance. It's not in the preceding slide. So SCARF. Anyone know David Rock? Your Brain at Work? So David Rock is sort of a rock star in this space these days. And what he did was he interviewed for this work about 39 leading neuroscientists and reviewed 200 or 300 articles. And in neuroscience now, we can do stuff that we couldn't do before with this thing called fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, I think is the I. And so what it does is in real time, I can see what part of your brain is lighting up. It's kind of coarse, but you know, is it this part or that part or whatever? And based on that research, we've learned a bunch of stuff. So the part of you that's you is right here. It's 1/10 of an inch thick. It's your prefrontal cortex. it's 4 or 5% of your brain by volume. It's the part of you that has dreams about the future. It's the part of you that has aspirations. It's the part of you that can set a goal and defer gratification and make sacrifices to attain it. It's the part of you that goes, if I do X, Y will happen, and if I do A, B will happen. B's better, so I'm going to do A. It evolved about 50,000 years ago, and it's got a couple of problems. So one problem is it's only 4 or 5% of your brain by volume, and so the analogy I would use is they say that on the Apollo missions that went to the moon, the computer that they had running that spaceship had the processing power of a 4-button calculator. That's your prefrontal cortex. It does not have a lot of RAM. It does not have a lot of processing power. It's only been around for 50,000 years. You know, evolution can't do stuff overnight. The second problem it has is that it is prone to blue screen. If you're tired, hungry, angry, it malfunctions and it produces bad results. So David Rock calls the prefrontal cortex the $100 computer. As magic as it is, the technology behind it isn't all that great. And the rest of your brain is the $10 million computer. So if you were evolution, you would not put this part of the brain in charge of everything because it fails too often and we would fail to eat, reproduce, and we'd be extinct as a species. So unless your prefrontal cortex is actively managing things, the rest of your brain is in charge, the $10 million computer. And the rest of your brain is highly proceduralized. It has a bunch of maps of the world, maps of patterns in the world that, you know, this means that there's traffic, and this means that we need to turn the air conditioning down, and this means we're in a hotel that does not have rugs on the floor, which would be a new pattern for me today. It's also got a set of procedures of, you know, if there's traffic, then I stop and I look both ways before I cross the street. Or now when I book hotels, I'm going to see if they have rugs on the floor. And so your brain is working on more or less autopilot, trying to find these patterns of the world and match them to behaviors that would be effective. So far, so good? It's solving for 5 things. Scarf, status. We have an amazing assortment of gradations of status in this world. You know, there's AVPs and VPs and SVPs and EVPs, and that's just the VPs. There's, you know, directors and general managers and high directors and low directors and, you know, salesmen who get the blue ribbon and salesmen who get the green ribbon and, you know, people who are in the cool kids and people who are not in the cool kids. And that's status. We solve for status. And when we see a situation that offers us status, we approach. And if we see a situation that threatens our status, we avoid. Certainty. We seek situations that map to our brain, then we go, I've seen this before and I know how it works. We avoid situations that are alien. I've never seen anything like this before. Autonomy. We seek situations where we get to make the choices. We avoid situations where somebody tells us what to do. Relatedness is the feeling you have when you're on a team, or the feeling you have with your spouse or significant other, or the feeling you have with your family. It's a sense of belonging, of being drawn to them. And fairness is a belief that the world works according to some rules, and it's not completely arbitrary and capricious and random, and I can count on some things. And so when what your brain is doing, unless your prefrontal cortex intervenes, is it is approaching when it sees scarf and avoiding when it sees. So let me pause. Is that common sense? Anything alien about that? So we come in and we say, hi, I'm from Scott Madden, and I'm here to put in this new process. So let's see what we just did to Greg. So status, I think we just diminished it, right? Because the old process was his, and now I'm. And then certainty, You know, he may know the old process stinks, but at least he knows what the process is, so whatever it is that's gonna happen next, he don't have a clue. Autonomy, well, we took that away. So when we announce or bring change, the first thing we've done is shot ourselves in the foot by threatening Greg. So the other thing I need to tell you is how the threat response works. The threat response is right here. It's called the amygdala. It's about the size of a walnut. And it evolved to save you from saber-toothed tigers. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just saying survival instincts.
Exactly.
Alertness, yeah.
Do you know about it?
I mean, to a degree, but
Well,
just
say a little
saying, okay. Well, I mean, basically saying our carnal instincts are to protect ourselves. I mean, alerting ourselves is danger. I mean, when humans were evolved, I mean, clearly we didn't think and function the way that we certainly do now, but it's actually reflective of what we have now. It's our instincts. We still carry that with us. Yeah.
That's exactly right, and that's my point. So what Tessa said is that the threat response thinks that it's life or death. You know, Tom got promoted to SVP and I'm just a VP. So in life, is that the end of the world? Probably not. There's still food on the table. I'm still employed. I'm probably making a good buck. But the part of my brain that lights up is the part that thinks we're going to die. That part of your brain is designed to do two things. One is it's designed to find 150% of all the saber-toothed tigers in the bush. If you think about it, if you were designing this, there are two ways to do it. One way would be fast, but oversample. The other way would be slow. It's always right. It takes more time, but it finds exactly 100%. So evolution picked door number one, and the reason is that if you run from a few saber-toothed tigers that aren't there, the species does better than if you take some time thinking about it and you miss one that's actually there. So it is very fast. It's also designed, as you were pointing out, it's designed to take over the brain. It shuts down the prefrontal cortex, it blocks everything else out, and it induces a fight or flight response. So when we threaten Greg by saying we're going to change the process, the stuff we lit up in his brain is powerful, it's quick, it's going to see threats that aren't there, and it's designed to grab hold of his behavior. So what do? The first thing we have to do is we've got to provide some rewards. We can't just threaten the poor guy. Although we are going to send you back to San Antonio next week.
That's fine.
But there'll be tableside guacamole.
That's right.
And maybe margaritas. Technically, I'm not sure those are scarf rewards, but the tableside guacamole is pretty good, right? So we need to provide recognition for status. Greg, you're doing such a great job on this new process. You know, this is terrific. We want to tell everybody on the steering committee. We need to talk about what Tom said, which is expectations. We got to close that gap between expectations and reality. Here's what's going to happen. You know, it'll be a little bit scary, but it's actually easy. A lot of people have done this before, and you'll be fine with it. We need to cede some control. You never want to design your change down to the last detail. Tim Banks, the plant manager at Bowen, we were doing a big workforce change effort, and he said to me, you know, Stuart, nobody calls their own baby ugly. We need to get a couple hundred people out there to put their fingerprints on this change so that this is their baby. And we spent 6 months doing that, and they did, and they embraced the change. So you want to define the general direction, but you want to make sure that the details. That's why a car salesman says, what color would you like? When they say that, they think they have you. You want to use small team group bonding. You ever wonder why consultants do breakout groups? When I do that, I'm harnessing your relatedness feelings. If I can get Greg and Tom to talk to each other about something I want them to think about, it's much more powerful than me talking to them. If I had more time, I would do some of that today. And then change the risk-reward architecture. The next thing we want to do is if that $10 million computer is based on proceduralized stuff, those maps of the world, They actually are physical networks of neurons in your brain, cells that fire together, wire together. The more often these two cells fire together, the more likely they are to fire together, and so they're little physical maps. We used to think, so neuroplasticity is when the brain rewires itself to form new patterns or change old patterns, either of how we see the world or how we behave. So we used to think at age 5 that you were done. And it is true if you have small children that IQ is locked at age 5, 95%. So you can do a lot that influences IQ until they're 5, and then after that, not so much. However, neuroplasticity doesn't change. You know, it's not as great as it was at age 4, but until you die, you can form new impressions of the world and new behaviors, unless there's some disease or something like that. But as long as you live, you can kind of keep learning and growing, which I think is a hopeful way to look at the world. So what changes these maps of the world is where you focus your attention. If you focus your attention repeatedly on something, you build a new map in either how to see the world or how to behave. So you design your project to get people to focus their attention. That's why there's a steering committee meeting every month. We have a strategy method where there's something called opportunity teams, and they do an opportunity assessment, and they're supposed to build a building block of the strategy, a component that we're going to forge strategy out of. And we give them a Word template. That's about 10 pages, and they prepare it. And then after that, we give them a PowerPoint template to summarize the Word template. So the reason that we do that, you know, if the Word template was great, we probably wouldn't need to do that. The reason that we do that is we're trying to focus their attention multiple times on the same thing. So we have them do the Word template, then the PowerPoint template, then we have them do a dry run, then we have them present to the steering committee. All the while we're forging these building blocks into strategy. Each time it gets a little better, each time the map of the world that they're building becomes a little more refined, and each time we solidify their belief. And so our recent strategy projects, the senior executives have been pleased with the strategy, but they've been even more pleased that we had hundreds of employees going, yes, this is a good strategy. So that's SCARF. So I am going to ask for questions and comments and then wrap up on time. Any questions, any comments? Yes, Jennifer?
Well, I was wondering, when you talk about change management, when you said, for example, specifically Greg, is it recommended that when the Scott Madden team goes in a consulting situation, are we looking for individuals, or are we looking for to interact with, say, the accounting department, or is it literally one-on-one that you're implementing these principles, or is it small groups, or how do you approach that situation?
Well, you know, Greg's a special case. So that's a good question. Seldom is it one individual. If you're doing enterprise strategy, the CEO might be, you know, she might be pretty important. It's more likely to be a department. What you want to do in consulting is two things. One is, oh golly, I think I broke this. One is for the accounting department, or for the HR department, or for everybody engaged in business planning. You want to get them to land on a good square. You want to get them to land on an answer that is right. That's the easier part. The harder part is you need to create a guiding coalition. You need to create enough people in that accounting department, in those senior executive ranks, in the finance department, who believe in the change so that after you're gone, they will keep doing it. In my view, and others might have a different answer, if there were 100 degree of difficulty points on what we do for a living, 40 are finding a good solution, 60 are creating the guiding coalition. The hard part is people. People do not want to think and act differently. If you're changing stuff, people have agendas. Somebody's going to get resources. Somebody's ox is going to get gored. Maybe this process helps Greg. Maybe it hurts him. But if he's a human being, that's going to bring out a reaction. So getting the right square defined and getting a group of people, a guiding coalition of critical mass. There are enough of them with enough power in the real world that after we're gone, this is going to keep going, is what you have to do. Does that answer your question? Jennifer asked, are you supposed to get one individual like Greg, or are you supposed to get a whole department? I'm supposed to say that before, I guess. Other questions?
So if you're trying to implement change over a division and there's resistance, where would you start? Would you start kind of at the top of the hierarchy and try to champion those people, or could you start at the bottom and kind of work your way up? Would it vary, based on the client?
Your formal actions are going to cascade. In reality, while you're doing that, the way I think about it is you want to work at all the levels at once. We did the Southern Company playbook, Southern Company Generation playbook in 1997 or 98. Tim Banks was the executive sponsor. So the idea of playbook was to write down how you're going to run the entire generation business, how you plan, how you budget, how you operate, how you maintain, how you do outages, how you do IT, how you link to the market, all this stuff. And I talk about our critical success factor as naivete. We were too stupid to know this was impossible. The culture of the Southern Company at the time was, which it still is to a degree, there were 4 or 5 operating companies then. I think there are only 4 now, or 3? 4. And so the big ones are Alabama and Georgia. And so if you're in Alabama and it came from Georgia, you do not need to know what it is. You know that you hate it. And if you're in Georgia and it came from Alabama, I was doing like hydro goals. So hydro is simpler than that power plant I showed you. It's like there's a tube with water through it, and there's the pinwheel. These are simple plants. I've got these 2 flip charts. I've got 14, 55-year-old crusty white guys who are plant managers, half from one place and half from the other. And I'm going, you Alabama boys, what are your metrics? And I write them down. You Georgia boys, what are your metrics? And I look at the 2 flip charts and I say, there's not one damn thing that's the same on those 2 flip charts. Tell me, is the water different in Alabama than it is in Georgia? And 14 men, without hesitating, say yes. And if I'd asked where it was better, we would have had a fist fight. So because that culture was so embedded, it was not possible to do what we're doing, but we're too stupid to know that. And so when we made our recommendations, they said they'd never be approved. When we developed our business case and it was approved, they said, ain't gonna be no good. And when the first chapter was written, which was, I think, Gripman activity-based costing, they said, it was actually good. No one will implement it. And so this time spans like September to May of a year. So in May, we roll this thing out to the 200 top managers in the Scrushy Center. Run that. There are 4,000 people in that company. You really can't have a conversation for more than 45 minutes in generation where somebody doesn't say the word playbook. And I can remember when we said playbook and people said, what you talking about, Willis? I have no idea what that is. During that time, it's about a year of my life, there was never a time that I was standing up like this in front of a meeting. It was always the clients. And so no one knows that, that was something that we worked on. Red Kitchens worked on it too, and some others. And so my answer is at all levels, a little bit at a time. It's a game of inches, and if you do that over a sustained period, you can get from, I thought we'd get in trouble if we did this, and now I think we'll get in trouble if we don't, and they still use it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. 3 minutes early, and thank you guys for your time and attention. I apologize that I'm on the calendar again tomorrow. I think this violates like a OSHA rule or something. And tonight, you guys need to tell Jennifer that we need more variety here, but I appreciate your attention and engagement, and I'll see you tomorrow morning for People Models with a video from a fellow who apparently is now President of the United States. So thank you.